She stood by the doorway, her suitcase trembling in her hands, eyes red from sleepless nights and silent wars. I watched as she turned away from the home we built on borrowed promises, our love drowned beneath unpaid bills and shattered dreams. Every step she took echoed the price of my silence, the weight of debts I hid behind smiles and "I'll fix it" lies. She thought she was escaping me. She had no idea she was leaving behind everything we could have been. And as the door closed, I realized, some debts aren't paid with money. They're paid with hearts that never heal. The house always felt colder in the mornings, even before she left. The kind of cold that crept in through the cracks of cheap windows, the kind landlords never bothered to seal. Sunlight slipped through the dusty curtains, trying to make everything look alive, but the light never stayed long enough to matter. It was a rented space, walls thin enough to hear neighbors argue about money, dreams, and betrayal. I used to laugh at them once. Now, I understood every sound too well. We used to wake up early, when hope was still stronger than exhaustion. She'd hum while making coffee, a soft rhythm that used to feel like home. I'd scroll through job listings that all seemed to want a younger man, one with a degree I never had or connections I couldn't afford. Some mornings, she'd look at me and smile anyway, as if her belief could fill the gaps my failures left behind. But belief fades faster than money does. Our story wasn't tragic at the start. We met at a bus stop, two strangers running late for different kinds of futures. She was going to an interview at a design firm. I was heading to a warehouse on the edge of town. The rain that day blurred everything, streets, faces, even our reasons for being there. Maybe that's why it was easy to talk. When everything looks the same, you cling to what feels different. Years later, the rain still came, but it never washed anything clean. It only reminded me of what we tried to build from scraps and second chances. We got married in a courthouse with flickering lights and a tired clerk who barely looked up when we said our vows. We didn't need witnesses, we had each other. We told ourselves love was enough. Love, and the promise that hard work could turn poverty into peace. But promises don't pay bills. Love doesn't erase overdue notices. Every month brought another envelope. Final reminder, immediate action required, balance due. I stopped opening them after a while. Maybe I thought if I ignored them, they'd forget about us too. But debts are patient, they wait. They grow in silence, just like guilt. She started to change slowly, in ways I didn't want to see. Her laughter became measured. Her steps quieter. The way she folded her clothes, precise, distant, like someone preparing to leave long before the suitcase appeared. I kept telling myself she was just tired. We both were. But it wasn't just exhaustion. It was something deeper. Something like disappointment that had finally learned how to breathe. The layoffs came in waves that year. The warehouse shut down, the machines silenced, the workers scattered like dust. They said, temporary closure. But everyone knew what that meant. The lucky ones found part-time gigs. The rest of us signed papers that promised little and delivered less. I told her I'd find something soon. I meant it. But the days stretched into weeks, the weeks into months, and hope started costing more than we could afford. She picked up extra shifts at the diner downtown, her hands raw from scrubbing tables, her smile forced for tips that barely covered groceries. I hated seeing her there, serving men who looked at her the way hunger looks at bread. But I couldn't say anything. What could I offer except apologies that sounded like excuses? When the rent went up again, I started borrowing, first from friends, then from people who didn't use names. Just quick money, I told myself. Just enough to get us through the month. But just enough never is. The more I borrowed, the deeper the hole grew, until it felt like I was digging our future's grave with every signature. She didn't know. Or maybe she did, but chose to pretend. Pretending is easier when the truth feels like drowning. Some nights, she'd sit by the window and stare out at the streetlights flickering over the cracked pavement. She said nothing, but I could hear her silence louder than words. That silence said, "We're losing something we can't name." I started avoiding mirrors. There's a kind of shame that makes you afraid to look yourself in the eye. I told myself I was protecting her, that I'd fix everything before she ever had to find out. But lies wrapped in good intentions are still lies. The night she found the letters, everything changed. She didn't yell. She didn't cry. She just stood there, the papers trembling in her hands, her eyes scanning numbers that didn't belong in a love story. Creditors, overdue payments, the small print of broken promises. That night she packed her bags for the first time. But she didn't leave right away. She placed her suitcase by the door and went to bed. She didn't touch me, didn't speak. Just lay there, staring at the ceiling. The space between us felt like miles. I stayed awake until sunrise, counting the seconds, each one reminding me of what I'd risked, not money, but trust. The morning light revealed what darkness tried to hide, the quiet end of a dream. She made breakfast like she always did, but the way she moved told me she was already gone. When she picked up her suitcase, I wanted to stop her. To beg. To explain. But what do you say when your actions have already spoken louder than love? That's when I showed her the box. A small, dented tin I kept under the sink. Inside, a stack of crumpled papers, bills, loan notes, overdue notices, all the pieces of the life I'd tried to shield her from. She didn't say a word. Just looked at them, then at me, as if seeing me for the first time. And in that silence, I saw it too, the man I'd become. The debts weren't just financial. They were emotional. Every lie, "I'm fine," every broken promise added up. The weight wasn't measured in dollars, but in moments we'd never get back. She zipped her bag slowly. The sound cut through the air like a blade. Then she walked toward the door. Her shadow lingered for a moment, a ghost of everything we once were, and then it was gone. After she left, the house stopped pretending to be a home. The rooms didn't echo anymore, they just held their breath, waiting for sounds that would never return. Her perfume lingered on the curtains, faint but cruel, like a memory refusing to die. I didn't pack her things away. I couldn't. Every folded shirt, every coffee mug, every hairpin she'd left behind felt like a confession, silent proof that I had once been loved by someone good, and ruined it anyway. Days melted into nights, and nights into something emptier. I tried to work, small jobs, whatever I could find. Painting fences, unloading trucks, handing out flyers no one read. It didn't matter. Every dollar I made disappeared before I could even count it. Debts don't forgive, and collectors don't wait. The men I owed weren't the kind that sent polite letters. They came in silence, their cars idling outside my building, their patience shorter than their tempers. I started selling things, first my phone, then the TV, then my tools. Each sale felt like peeling off a piece of my own skin. Eventually, I sold her sewing machine, the one she saved months to buy. The guilt hit harder than hunger ever did. But hunger can be quieted, guilt grows louder the more you ignore it. I wanted to call her. Just once. To tell her I was sorry. But apologies are a luxury when you've already spent all your chances. So I stayed quiet. The kind of quiet that hums in your ears until it sounds like punishment. It was around that time that the job offer came, or what they called a job. A man from the old warehouse reached out, said there was work in the city. Cash only, no paperwork, he said. The kind of work you don't ask too many questions about. Desperation makes you ignore warning signs, it makes the dangerous sound like opportunity. The first week, I cleaned out foreclosed houses, stripping walls, pulling copper, clearing out what was left of people's lives. But the neighborhoods weren't abandoned, they were evicted. Families pushed out, their belongings tossed into trucks like garbage. Most of them were like us, people who worked hard, believed harder, but still fell short. There was one house I can't forget. Toys scattered across a dead lawn. A refrigerator still humming. Photographs left behind, birthdays, graduations, smiles that didn't know they'd be erased. I stood there with a crowbar in my hand, supposed to rip out the metal fittings, but I couldn't move. I kept thinking about her. About us. About how easily love can become debris in someone else's story. The others didn't think much of it. Business is business, they said. But it wasn't business. It was something darker, a system that swallowed people whole and called it the economy. I started to notice the pattern. The names on the mailboxes, the family photos, most of them belonged to people like me. People with brown skin, with accents, with names the banks never learned to pronounce. We weren't failing because we were lazy. We were failing because someone had already decided we wouldn't be allowed to win. Each paycheck I earned went straight into the hole I dug: interest, penalties, threats. No matter how much I worked, the numbers never changed. Poverty has its own gravity. It pulls you back no matter how far you try to climb. One night, I came home to find an envelope slipped under the door. No name, just numbers, a reminder that time was running out. I sat there on the floor, holding that paper, realizing I was one late payment away from losing everything, even the roof above me. The same roof she once said made her feel safe. That night I dreamed of her. Not the version that left, but the one that used to laugh while painting the walls yellow because every home needs sunlight. In the dream, she turned to me and said, "You promised me peace." When I woke up, I wasn't sure if it was a dream or an accusation. I started noticing her face in strangers, on buses, in markets, in reflections that weren't mine. Grief does that. It turns every passerby into a possibility. Every noise into hope. But hope can be cruel when it doesn't belong to you anymore. Then, one morning, I saw her name, printed on a flyer for a charity event downtown. Community fundraiser for displaced families, it said. There she was, smiling in the photo, standing beside volunteers. My chest tightened. She had moved on, found a way to help others while I was still trying to save myself. I wanted to be proud. But all I felt was small. Still, something pulled me there that night. I stood across the street, watching through the glass. She looked different, lighter somehow, like she'd shed the weight I was still carrying. I wanted to walk in, to tell her I'd found work, that I was paying things off, that maybe we could try again. But lies disguised as hope are still lies. Then I saw it. A man in a suit, the same kind who once sat across from me at the loan office, the kind who smiled while denying help. He shook her hand for the cameras, pretending generosity. I knew his name. He was the one who signed off on the foreclosures we cleaned. The same system that broke us was now using her to polish its image. That's when something inside me cracked. It wasn't anger, not exactly. It was recognition. A brutal understanding that we weren't victims of bad luck, we were casualties of design. I walked home that night through streets littered with the remains of promises. Billboards preaching new opportunities loomed over shuttered stores and hollow homes. The city kept moving, pretending everything was fine, while people like us faded quietly into statistics. When I reached my door, I found another notice taped to it: eviction. The final one. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because I finally understood what defeat really felt like. It wasn't loud or violent. It was quiet. It was a whisper that said, "You never stood a chance." Inside, I sat on the floor surrounded by bills, the tin box still half full of paper sins. I thought about her, how she left to escape the weight I brought, not knowing that weight wasn't mine alone. It belonged to a world built to keep people like us in debt, in life, in love, in legacy. And that realization, bitter as it was, began to grow. Not as hope, but as purpose. Because once you see the system for what it is, you can't unsee it. The eviction notice gave me 3 days. 3 days to erase 5 years of life. I walked from room to room, touching the walls, tracing faint handprints left from when we'd painted them together. The yellow had faded into a dull gray, the kind that doesn't reflect light anymore. I packed what little I had into an old duffel, a few shirts, a photograph, the tin box of debts I still couldn't throw away. Outside, the street was loud but indifferent. Cars passed. Neighbors watched through cracked blinds. I wanted to scream at them, to tell them how easy it is to lose everything, not from laziness, not from choice, but from being born one step behind and told to catch up to a race that started generations before us. The world keeps score unfairly. It rewards those who already have, and punishes those who only have hope. I'd seen it in every foreclosure, every paycheck shorted, every loan denied for reasons that were never about credit. They said, risk assessment. But what they meant was skin color, zip code, last name. That night, I went back to the same neighborhood where I'd stripped houses for cash. The same block where children used to play before the eviction trucks came. Now, the home stood empty, hollow shells with boarded windows and doors sealed shut by silence. I walked past the one that haunted me, the house with the toys still scattered in the yard. The swing creaked in the wind, slow and mournful, as if remembering the weight of laughter. I pushed the gate open. It groaned in protest. Inside, dust floated through moonlight like ghosts unwilling to leave. I sat on the bare floor, staring at the cracked paint on the walls. Somewhere in another life, this could have been our home, the one we dreamed of when we still believed in happy endings. In that moment, something shifted. Maybe it was madness, maybe it was clarity. But I realized I wasn't the only one buried beneath invisible debt. This entire neighborhood was built on borrowed time, and someone somewhere was cashing in on our suffering. I thought of her again, standing under the bright lights at that fundraiser, shaking hands with the man who profited from our downfall. She had escaped the wreckage, found a new way to survive. And yet, her new world was built on the same broken bones. Maybe she didn't see it, or maybe she chose not to. Survival has its own rules. But I couldn't unsee anymore. I walked deeper into the house, past rooms filled with memories that weren't mine. A child's drawing on the wall, stick figures holding hands, a sun smiling above them. Below it, in a shaky scrawl, someone had written, home. I felt something tighten in my chest, grief, rage, clarity, all of it at once. I reached into my pocket, pulled out the eviction notice, and tore it into shreds. The pieces fluttered to the floor like dying birds. For the first time in months, I felt a strange sense of control. Not freedom, not yet, but defiance. The kind of defiance that comes when you realize you've already lost everything worth taking. The next morning, I went to the bank. The same one where we once sat, hands clasped, begging for a loan to fix the roof that leaked every time it rained. The same man was still there, the one with the practiced smile, the one who called me, Buddy, while denying our request. He didn't recognize me. Why would he? To him, I was just another file, another unpaid balance. But I remembered him. I remembered how he looked at her, with pity disguised as professionalism. That pity burned hotter than any insult could. I placed the tin box on his desk. He frowned, confused. I opened it slowly, spilling the contents across the polished wood: bills, final notices, handwritten apologies to collectors who never answered. These are the debts you gave me, I said silently, though the words never left my lips. And these are the pieces of the life you helped destroy. He spoke, but I didn't hear him. His voice blurred into the hum of the air conditioner, into the clicking of distant keyboards. I wasn't there for conversation. I was there for closure. Afterward, I walked out of the bank and kept walking. Past the city's glass towers, past the billboards selling dreams I could no longer afford. Every reflection showed me the same thing: a man invisible to the world that broke him. By the time I reached the waterfront, the sky had begun to bleed orange. I sat on the edge, watching the water move, restless, endless. I took the last photograph I had of us from my pocket. It was from the day we moved into our first apartment. We looked young, stupid, hopeful. She was laughing at something I'd said, and for a second, I could almost hear that laugh again. I tore the photo in half. Not out of anger, but acceptance. Half of it I kept, her face. The other half, mine, I let the wind take. It drifted away, swallowed by the city's hum. The water below shimmered, reflecting a world that kept moving forward while I stayed frozen in place. I thought of all the people I'd seen lose their homes, their families, their dignity. All of them caught in the same invisible net. Maybe I wasn't meant to escape it either. Maybe my story wasn't a warning, just another repetition. But if pain could teach anything, it was this: the system counts on silence. It thrives on the shame of those too broken to speak. And in that realization, I found the first spark of something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not hope. Not forgiveness. But purpose. I stood up, turned away from the water, and walked back toward the city lights. The world hadn't changed, not yet. But I had. And sometimes, change starts with someone finally refusing to disappear quietly. Weeks passed before I noticed how silence can start to sound like acceptance. The noise of the city kept moving, swallowing everything: sirens, laughter, the hum of lives that didn't know mine existed. I found work again, small and temporary, the kind that paid enough to eat but never enough to rise. I swept the same streets that once led me home, collecting trash left by those who never looked down long enough to see me. Every night, I returned to the shelter, a narrow cot, a metal locker, a place where stories like mine gathered and repeated themselves. Men spoke in whispers about debts, evictions, lost families, bad luck. But it wasn't luck. It never was. It was design, the kind of design that wears a suit and signs policies, the kind that turns survival into competition. I used to think poverty was about money. It's not. It's about time, how much of it you lose waiting for someone to see your worth. Every moment I'd spent working, begging, apologizing, it was all time stolen by a system that measured humanity in interest rates and credit scores. One night, while sweeping outside the train station, I saw her again. She was across the street, handing out flyers for another fundraiser, this time for affordable housing initiatives. Her smile was softer now, less performative, more tired. For a moment, I thought she saw me. Her eyes met mine through the blur of headlights. But she didn't cross. Maybe she wasn't sure if I was real, or maybe she had already buried that part of her life. I didn't call out. I didn't move. Love doesn't always need to be reclaimed. Sometimes, letting it go is the only honest thing left to do. I walked away, but her presence lingered, not as pain, but as a quiet reminder that we had both survived, just in different ways. She found healing by helping others. I found purpose by seeing the truth for what it was. That night, I began writing, not letters of apology, but stories. Stories about the people whose homes I'd cleared out. The single mother whose rent doubled overnight. The old man who worked 50 years and still died owing. The children who lost their playgrounds to construction sites for people who'd never lived there. I wrote them all down on scraps of paper I found, napkins, receipts, even the backs of eviction notices. I wanted to make sure their names didn't disappear into statistics. I wanted someone, somewhere, to feel the weight of what was lost. Word spread slowly. A volunteer from a community center read one of my stories online and reached out. They invited me to speak, to share what I'd written. I almost said no. I'd spent too long being invisible. But something in me whispered, maybe it's time. So I went. I stood before a small crowd in a room with flickering lights and folding chairs, not much different from the courthouse where we once said our vows. I told them everything. Not for pity, not for redemption, but for truth. The words poured out like confession and fire. I spoke about debt, not the kind that fits in a spreadsheet, but the kind that breaks a spirit. The kind passed down through generations of people who work twice as hard for half as much. I spoke about her, how love can drown under the weight of survival, how sometimes good people leave not because they stop caring, but because they can't carry the burden anymore. When I finished, there was silence. Heavy still, almost sacred. Then someone clapped. Then another. And soon the room filled with the sound of people who understood, not because they'd read it in books, but because they'd lived it too. For the first time, I didn't feel ashamed. I felt seen. In the days that followed, the center asked me to keep writing, to collect more stories, to speak for those who couldn't. I wasn't saving anyone. But maybe by telling the truth, I could stop us from being erased. And somewhere deep inside, I knew she'd hear one of those stories one day. Maybe she'd recognize my voice, maybe she wouldn't. But that didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that the silence had broken. Years later, I found myself standing in front of that same house, the one with the child's drawing on the wall. The boards were gone. The lawn was green again. A new family lived there. Laughter spilled from the windows. The swing creaked in rhythm with joy this time. I smiled, not with envy but gratitude. Life had returned. Maybe not for me, but for someone else. And that was enough.